This is my home. I care about the people here. I love this part of the country. I love this part of the state. I think it is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. The people here are phenomenal. Like the Southern hospitality, the kindness, the level of trust that strangers have with one another is beautiful. And I find it to be disappointing and upsetting that we have someone in office currently who is claiming to be for working people, who is not, who is voting against the best interests of his constituents, because to me that doesn't reflect on the people of this district. That reflects on a lack of integrity, a lack of character. Like I said, the amount of trust that people have in this part of the country and the state, and assuming the best, that's being abused by our current representative. And I can't stand for that.
You know, from going through this 2 years ago, when you do this, you are putting yourself out there in a way to get the worst part of people often, right? And we all know the polarization in our country. We all know the heated rhetoric we hear every day. How do we tone that down? How do we take some of the heat out of the conversation where we are, it's like when we talk to someone, we're looking for the things that we disagree on as opposed to things we do agree on. How do you, being someone who is now in the political world 2 times running for Congress, how do you address that and try to fix that?
As far as within the campaign, my personal rule is that I'm not going to be selective about who I talk with. In talking about last cycle, especially when we had long lines outside polling locations during early voting, I would start at that 100-foot mark, and I would work my way down the line. I would not skip over people, even people who were wearing like head-to-toe MAGA gear. I care about those people just as much as I care about the people who aren't wearing that. And I have had productive, really informative discussions. I've learned a lot doing that. I really value that feedback. I value those connections. And so I think a lot of it is we can't be afraid of talking with other people because we're afraid of it. We're afraid of being judged. We're afraid of our ideas being judged. It's okay to disagree. You're not always going to like what I have to say, and I may not always like what you have to say, but we're both deserving of respect and humanity, and that's what I want to bring to Congress. I think we need to rebuild trust, and we need to find a way to do that as leaders, because the American people look to leaders in the nation, or should be able to at least. I don't know how much they do anymore, but we should be able to look to the people in charge and see them modeling that behavior. I think it is absolutely okay to discuss a voting record. It is absolutely okay to discuss behaviors that are upsetting. But when we're talking about dehumanizing someone for the sake of trying to get ahead politically, that's where we're failing. So I think in Congress, we need to focus on, and it's not fun, but focus on that common ground, no matter how narrow that is, and work from there. And that may mean crafting legislation that covers, single issue stuff. That could be like civil asset forfeiture, where the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans in this nation don't like the idea of civil asset forfeiture. Now, it's not like a super hot topic, so it's not exciting, but the more we can work together to get those little pieces of legislation passed, the more that trust can grow and the more we can rebuild to the point where we're able to work together to pass larger pieces of legislation that most people are going to agree on. Most decorated Marine of the Vietnam War at the time of his death. I think I actually have. It was on NBC. It was Diary of a Hero. He was killed in 1965, and I think the story came out in 1966, but I actually keep the old recording from 1966 on my phone.
It's a fascinating story.
It is. Yeah, it's really fascinating. He and my grandmother, my mom and her older sister, were really young, and apparently they wrote back and forth. So, and after he was killed, my grandmother just couldn't deal with it. So she pretty much had all these letters that were just like boxed up. All the things from his desk were just packed away. Mm-hmm. And we did not discover them. And so, I mean, they're packed away in the 60s. We did not discover them until a few years ago. And so as a family, it was like over Christmas or something, and we found them, and like we all ended up, because we're all home for the holidays, and we ended up just sorting through all these letters and finding these things, these letters written back and forth. It was really wild, but it was clear that he went into it. You could kind of read that the tone shifting as his time, as the war drew on, as he kind of found out more and more, and simultaneously less and less about why this is happening. And if I'm not mistaken, the reason why he originally went, he was a helicopter pilot and he flew jets, and he wanted to get flight hours because he wanted to go to flight school to go into space.
Gotcha.
And so I guess you can quote me on this because this is exactly what it's about, but I want to say he had been accepted to flight school because he wanted to join NASA, and he was working on his PhD for meteorology. And so that's where he ended up, but he talked in those letters about what really mattered to him, which was flying these medevac missions. I mean, he saved a ton of people, and he completed a lot of really dangerous missions where he was actually advised to not go because it was too dangerous. And his reasoning was, well, I do it because I know if I were out there in a field bleeding out, I would want to see that helicopter coming in. Like, there's an audio recording of him saying this. It's pretty interesting. It's like he and my grandmother sent these real tapes to each other as well. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. And it's, on one hand, it's weird to be proud of someone who you've never met, but I'm proud to be related in any way to someone with that level of altruism and compassion. But then I also look at the flip side, which is after he was killed, my mom's mom fell apart. And my mom was, my grandmother was always an incredibly kind, gentle person, but she